Thank you very much for being here tonight. I very much appreciate that. And thank you for being willing to listen to everything that came before. That's important information. I just want to ask for one quick round of applause for the Albany area John Birch Society who put this whole thing together. They do fantastic work. There are very few people across the country that can turn out people like this. And so what I want to talk to you about today is universities. My credentials. I am a 25-year university professor. If I had to do it over again, I'm not sure I'd do it. I went to school. I got my PhD in 1997. I got my first master's degree in 1992. And so I was in undergraduate in the late 1980s. And that's when things were starting to change. A lot of people my age or close to my age here remember what it was like in the late 80s, early 90s to go to college, right? There was still a lot of politics then, wasn't there? There were still a lot of agendas, but you more or less could speak your mind, right? You could differ from the professors. You were going to get pushed to the left, but you could fight back, and there were many student organizations that were more conservative as well. Well, what's happened between then and now? Then and now, well, we've got what I call, and I think the only word to describe it is, social justice education has dominated. If you were here in 2013, can't believe it was 5 years ago, when I first came and talked to you about Common Core. I think we almost had 1,000 people show up for that one. Well, if you remember what we talked about with Common Core was basically a federal takeover of our elementary, middle, and high schools. And it substituted ideology for actual learning. This is what I mean when I say social justice education. There's a difference between social justice, which is a desire, it's biblical as a matter of fact, a desire to create socially just systems. There's a difference between that and what we now see today as social justice education. Social justice education is the subordination of real learning, real reading, writing, and arithmetic, and math and science to political objectives. Up until about maybe 1998, 2000, our kids were getting a moderately political education. They were being pushed left, but they were at least learning more or less how to read, how to think, how to write. Not so much anymore. If you look at the achievement of American university, well, how many of you have seen any of these man-on-the-street interviews where people like Jesse Waters goes to a university, right, and puts a microphone under a college at Harvard, and Yale and Princeton, Stanford, and puts a microphone under somebody's mouth and says, tell us the 3 branches of American government. Tell us something meaningful, right, about any aspect of politics. And these kids who are paying $100,000 a year for an Ivy League education can't say much of anything. And yet, it's funny, isn't it? If you think about you've been watching the news lately on college campuses, and you never quite know, do you, if college kids are frail snowflakes or they are violent protesters and revolutionaries. You notice that? If the modern college kid isn't whining about microaggressions, whining about mistreatment, whining about the curriculum, whining about having too much homework, whining about having too many exams to take, well then they're throwing rocks and bricks at conservative speakers. They're driving people off campus, pulling fire alarms to close buildings. They're barricading themselves in buildings to keep conservative speech and non-liberal voices from being heard. How can you be at one and the same time? Radically sensitive to the point of collapse, and brutal and thuggish to the point that you're shutting down the first, the second, the whole collection of amendments, right? You're willing to jettison them in the name of your particular values. And that's what social justice education gets us. It turns kids into hypersensitive kids. They sense outrage and injustice anywhere. They see it all over the place. In fact, the very word microaggression, a college professor invented that. It's all the norm now, right? The very word microaggression is something to keep in mind. We would not have had to invent microaggressions if we weren't really radically quickly running out of macroaggressions. I mean, I really think it's fair to say, isn't it? I mean, no one is kept out of school for any reason. Racially, ethically, sexually, nobody's kept out of school. And there's all sorts of state and federal money for anybody who wants to go to school for any reason. In fact, this is one of the problems we have now. There are far too many kids in college. And that almost sounds like an outrage when you're talking to a regular audience, right? But what do you do with kids who do not want to go to college and refuse to do what it takes to be in college? I would tell you, I teach at the University of Wisconsin system, which is considered a very good university system. About 4 out of 10 of my university students, 40 to 45%, don't belong. Either they intellectually cannot do the work, or attitudinally they will not do it. And so you see what happens. When you start bringing kids, almost 50% of our kids to school, and this is true at all colleges. I've taught at 7 different universities, major research institutions, small liberal arts college. I've been all different parts of the country, taught in the Bible Belt in Oklahoma, taught just not too far from here in Philadelphia, taught at Purdue and Oklahoma State. And it's been about the same everywhere I've gone. But think about what happened. Back in 2008, one of the first things President Obama did was federalize the student loan program. That seemed like a good idea, right? Prior to that, you had to take a loan out from a bank. And you go to the bank and say, my daughter wants to go to SUNY New York, one of the New York schools. I need a couple $100,000 for her tuition over the next couple of years. By the way, she's going to major in women's studies and creative writing. And the bank's going to tell you, no, right? Unless you have a better chance becoming a professional athlete on a scholarship than you do getting a job that's going to pay you back that kind of money. So the bank's argument was, we'll give you money for college, but it depends on what you're majoring and what you're going to do with it. When we federalized the student loan program, then everybody got the same amount of money no matter what they wanted to major in. And what's that led to? 1.2 trillion with a T. I'm bad at math, but that's a lot of $1.2 trillion in student loan debt. That's never going to get paid back. You ask yourself, why are so many of our kids, my university kids a year and a half ago in May, they all wanted to vote for Bernie Sanders before Hillary kneecapped him out of the race. And when I asked them why, their answer was, he's going to waive our tuition. He's going to waive our student loans. Bernie promised that, right? Do you know if the millennials had voted in the last election, the Trump election, if millennials alone had voted, Hillary Clinton would have won 49 states electorally. And so we've got an issue, right? This idea. It used to be that we kind of would roll our eyes about what goes on in college campuses. Well, that's insulated, isn't it? What goes on in college campuses, it doesn't really transfer into the real world. Well, we're starting to see that it does. First of all, we're forcing more and more kids into college who do not want to be there. And I mean that seriously. They don't want to be there. And kids who show up at college remedial, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you showed up with a 7th or 8th grade reading level in college. You had to spend a whole year taking remedial classes before you could then start your college classes. Do you know that kids are now getting credit for the remedial classes? You think about this. If you bring 40 to 50% of your university kids in, and I think 40 is low, actually, nationwide. You bring 40 to 50% of your kids in who really can't do college work, well, you can't fail them. I can't fail them. Because that's 50% of meal plans not eaten, 50% of dorm rooms empty, 50% of books not sold in the bookstore. And it really is, it's funny. Perhaps the only place in America that really, really takes seriously socialism are college campuses, right? I mean, Hollywood pretends to, but it's awfully hard to do that when you're Robert De Niro and got $100 million in the bank. But universities will try to convince you that they care about all this inequity, that universities are places perhaps uniquely qualified, the last hope in America for equality. And yet, when you think about the way universities are structured, they're taking all this money. They loved it when the student loans were federalized because they keep taking your kids, even if your kids have no real hope to pass. Of that $1.2 trillion of student loan debt, more than half of it was taken out by kids who never made it past the second year before they failed out. So you're saddling these kids at 18, 19, 20 with all of this debt. We had a couple of kids working for us at Freedom Project, good, solid Christian kids, conservative kids, but he was a communications major in college, and she was a theater major. And between the two of them, 24 years old, they had $180,000 of student loan debt. 180. They had degrees in theater and communications. But to this day, haven't been able to buy a house. Can't buy a house. I mean, the quality of your life, and I don't blame these kids. They're going to college, and I should also point out, 30 years ago, a college degree guaranteed you a better job. A job, right? Not anymore. There are new statistics out that show that college kids are a little bit, even if falling behind a little bit, kids who don't have a college degree in terms of the jobs. We have, my university stopped doing it. I've been at the 7 universities I've taught at. I've talked to all these CEOs. They have these corporate weeks, right, where businesses will come to your college to try to recruit seniors, these job fairs. Well, they stopped doing them. And I was asking a couple of CEOs about that once. About 8 months ago, and one of my CEOs said, we can't hire your people. I said, why not? They've got a college degree now. He said, they've got a college degree. They're 25 years old. That's the other thing I should preface this with. Our kids can't get a 4-year degree in 4 years. Do you remember when you went to college, you took 5 classes a semester, maybe 6 sometimes? They're taking 3 now, and they can barely handle it. It's taking them 6 years to get a 4-year degree. The average age of a 4-year college graduate who starts at about age 18 is 25 years old now. And that's 2 extra years. If it takes you 6 years, that's 2 extra years of student loan debt that these kids have, that they're suffering under. And it's really a big problem when you think about it, because that money is never going to be paid back. And so the universities love this, because when the kids come to your school and fail, that money still goes to the universities. You would think the universities, for all their talk about social justice, would pay back to the government when they were right. I mean, if the universities really care this much about equity, and you bring these kids to campus, right, and you set them up to try to make them succeed, and they don't succeed, right? And again, remember, about half of it's attitude. Only about half of the kids who don't belong just aren't intellectually qualified. Half of them just will not do it. And you would think the universities would pay that back. And as far as social justice and progressivism and equity goes, there is no institution in American life today more rigidly class-based than universities. I mean, think about what universities are. You've got the graduate student teachers who do the bulk of the teaching, right? Poor kids seeking their graduate degrees. Then you've got the assistant professors who don't have tenure. Then you've got the associate professors. After 6 years, you get tenure. Then you got the full professors. Then you got 18 different levels of bureaucracy, right, going up to the top. Name another a career in American life where you can work for 6 years and then be guaranteed a job for the rest of your life where you can't be fired. I mean, you heard the horrible things that this university professor out in California said about Barbara Bush on the day she died, right? Or the idea that somehow we're using tenure to protect differing opinions. We're really not. We keep hiring the same kinds of people again and again. And you see it in every aspect of life, too. We're bringing back, the progressive liberals who run campus are bringing back segregation. Oh, yes, they are. We fought for how many decades to desegregate, to make sure that everybody can live together, everybody eats together, everybody works together. Well, on campuses all across this country, including in New York State, universities are building dorms just for transgender kids, or building dorms just for racial minorities. Or just for women's studies kids. So we are resegregating kids now in the name of progressivism. How did classical liberalism become the very thing it said it was fighting? First, classical liberals in the 40s, 50s, 60s, right? They were all for free speech. Not anymore on campuses. They're setting up speech code places, right? Little speech squares on college campuses, where that's the only place on a college campus you're allowed to speak freely. The First Amendment, right? The idea that language, that if what you say hurts somebody, you're not allowed to say it. I got news for you. If you're a good teacher, you're saying something that hurts somebody's feelings every single day you're not teaching a class right. That'd be like putting a prohibition on grandmothers, all right? You know how grandma's going to tell you the truth, right? You tell grandmas, right? You're not allowed, or take your kids away from Child Protective Services if you don't say, tell them the truth. Education. You can't possibly have education if you're not making kids uncomfortable. Name one meaningful thing in life, just one, that doesn't come from struggle. You want to be a better athlete? What do you got to do? You got to tear up the old muscle, right? How do you build new muscle? You got to rip the old up. Every aspect, love is work. Real love is work and sacrifice. There's not a single thing in your life where you can claim safe spaces for. Safe spaces are the death of education. They are the death of freedom. They are the death of liberty. And ultimately, they're the death of love, too. Because you know what there's not a lot on college campuses anymore? Love. Everything has become this fever swamp, high-pitched political battle. Where, again, we've reached the point. And of course, it cuts one way. It depends on who's speaking, right, in terms of who gets to say what. We talked about this idea of socialism. I'm going to show you some things in a moment about socialism. But why do our kids want to become socialists? 53%. It's more at my university, right? I'm sure at the big universities, Columbia, I'm sure it's a lot higher there. Think about what a university is for a second. A university is a place where people like me start going to school at age 5. Went to kindergarten at age 5, went through high school, graduated high school, went right to college for 4 years. Went from 4 years to my first 2-year master's degree. 2 years later, I got a second master's degree. 6 years later, I got a PhD. And then I immediately got a job teaching at a university where I have taught for the last 25 years. In other words, people like us have never had a real job. Do you understand why socialism works for us? We get up 2 or 3 times a week, we get up at a university, and we lecture to the kids for an hour. It's a grueling schedule, 3 or 4 hours a week. And do you know, somebody else erases the blackboard, somebody else vacuums the carpet, somebody else washes the windows, somebody else brings the food in, somebody else cuts the grass, somebody else provides the health care for the kids, somebody else cleans the dorms. In other words, we lecture 3 or 4 times a week, and everybody else who we don't see, we do not know their names, does all the real work to keep the university functioning. None of those people get tenure. None of those people get big raises from the state every 4 years. None of those people have cushy retirement benefits. They just do the work. And you understand why socialism works for university professors? Because we are the party, right? We're the state-controlled party. We're the oligarchy that runs the socialist state. What looks real, we've never had to make a payroll. That's why socialism looks good to us. And that's what we're passing on to your kids. And so we talked about this with regards to resegregating. We're resegregating campuses now. All right? You can only say things if you're this or that or the other. And how about this whole idea of cultural appropriation? The idea that if you borrow something from somebody, so if you're a Hispanic kid and you go out to an Irish pub in Green on St. Patrick's Day, you've just culturally appropriated. You've just insultingly stole from somebody else's culture. Well, I got news for you. If you are not appropriating the best aspects of everybody's culture, you're not doing it right. Why wouldn't you take the best of other cultures? And see, this is part of the big problem we have in college campuses, is the death of the melting pot. We are not Americans. There is no such thing as America. We are all small little pools of ethnicity or race or gender or class. And we can't get along. We can't talk to each other. The minute we start to presume, right, that we can borrow from this or that, is the minute we've created a microaggression. If I, a Hispanic kid, goes to an Irish bar on St. Patrick's Day, I've appropriated Irish culture. I'm insulting the Irish. Ever been to an Irish bar on St. Patrick's Day? You're not appropriating anything. And I go back to my point. What makes America great, and has always made America great, is the diversity of it. Even when certain groups were underprivileged or overprivileged, right? And we know, African Americans, Jews, the Irish, the Italians. I mean, the litany goes on. But even as those groups were being oppressed and moving through the system, they were giving to the culture valuable things. Valuable things that mainstreamed certain aspects of culture. Italian food, jazz music, things that got popular, that pulled cultures up as well. That's the melting pot idea. Do you know now that the melting pot idea in a college campus is considered racist, right? The idea that we become Americans, wherever we come from, we come here to become Americans, that idea is now considered racist, sexist, and bigoted. What we want, the progressives want, is that balkanization, right? There is no American culture. It started first with all the hyphenating, right? American blank blank, Italian American, or whatever you want to call yourself. But it's gotten worse now. It's gotten to the point where can't talk to each other, can't speak to each other. The minute we borrow something or admire something in another culture that we want to make part of us, then all the cries of discrimination. So what I mean by microaggressions, right? Come on, the idea that you like to eat soul food or you like to drink have Japanese beer when you go out and have some sushi. The idea that in doing that, you're creating some great racial sin, that tells you that we have indeed made progress. And think about the sexuality revolution, too. We keep getting told as conservatives, we are the anti-science party. With all due respect, biology says you've got 2 genders, male and female. That is biologically verifiable. It is biologically unarguable. And yet, if you make that argument on a college campus today, they're going to call you a bigot. Did you see the sophomore in college at Indiana University of Pennsylvania about a month ago? Biology student in a biology class. And the professor was using a lot of class time talking about 76 different genders in a science class. Not studying biology or cells or anything like that. She was taking multiple days, this professor, to talk about 76 different kinds of gender orientation. This kid raised his hand and said, well, we're all biology majors. Biology says there's man and woman, male and female. To which his professor said, you keep your bigoted opinions to yourself. She had him removed from class. She had him removed from his dorm. He was on the verge of being expelled from the university. Expelled. For simply asserting what biology says. He didn't even say, I believe it. He said simply, I'm a biologist, and he held up this is the textbook, right? And for that, he was this close to being expelled until the national media picked it up, and they were shamed into not. So let's understand this. You've got man and woman, male and female, which are now considered on college campuses completely social constructs. They don't exist. Yet 76 different gender identities, you better treat like they're scientifically true or they're going to punish you. Right? And who's the anti-science party again? And when you think about what's happened here, this is what's happened with social justice education. It's antisocial and it's unjust. Because it is not about teaching kids critical thinking. It is about teaching kids politics, getting them really worked up about politics. In fact, I want to share my experience with this. What I did for about 12 years at 5 different universities, I gave, the first day of class, I would give my students a quiz. Without telling them my name or passing out a syllabus or anything like that, I would just give them a quiz. 20 basic questions about all sorts of things, mostly American culture and history. I needed to know where they were. If I'm going to teach college to these kids, I need to figure out where they are. It's shocking where they were. What they don't know is staggering. Here's the thing. We are not teaching kids fundamentals. We are not teaching kids basic history. I don't know if I've mentioned this to you yet, but I would argue that my college juniors and seniors have about a 9th grade reading level on average. They're reading like freshmen in high school. In fact, a lot of surveys have come out recently that show that a college education now, a 4-year college degree, is what a high school degree was 30, 40 years ago. In fact, others are arguing now that a 4-year college degree is pretty much the kind of degree you get in high school in most European nations. It's that. And yet, what are you paying for that 6 years it takes to get that 4-year degree? To get that basic high school literacy. That's what I was telling you about the IBM people. The people who came to my campus for these job fairs. They said, we can't hire your kids. They're 25 years old. They've got $80,000 in student loan debt when they graduate. They will not work entry-level jobs. They feel like they're entitled to something much more. We'd be better served hiring an intern at age 18. Wow. Right? And train them in the business for 2 years and then just hire them. Right? They're happy to work on entry-level jobs. It's that entitlement sense. And part of it's entitlement. Hey, I have a college degree. That's supposed to mean something. Number one. And number two, hey, I paid $80,000 for that college degree. In terms of debt, I can't afford to work what you pay entry-level employees for. So the job fairs are drying up because they can't find college kids who are able to do the work or willing to do the work for and pay the dues to work your way through it. So I started to give these college quizzes. And I want to share with you some of the results here. First of all, I actually kind of made the news. Let me see if this is going to work. You got the volume ready? Go ahead. We actually made the news with these quizzes.
Incoming college students overwhelmingly believe that slavery was invented by Americans and is an exclusively American phenomenon. That according to Professor Duke Pesta of the University of Wisconsin at Oshkosh, who spent more than a decade testing first-year students at 5 different colleges. In an interview with the website The College Fix, Pesta said many of the students, quote, came to college without the basic rudiments of American history or Western culture, and their reading level was pretty low. Pesta said on one quiz, 29 out of 32 students knew Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner, but just 3 out of the 32 correctly identified him as a former president.
And look, I want to say from the start, absolutely. One of the things I'm most proud about America, and the West in general, is we teach our kids what we did wrong. Our kids learn the downside of Vietnam. Our kids learn about the tradition of slavery. We teach our kids those, and we must. You know, in Japan, to this day in Japan, high school kids don't learn anything about World War II except the atomic bomb. There is nothing in the Japanese history books about the Bataan Death March. There is nothing in the Japanese history books about the sneak attack at Pearl Harbor. There is nothing in Japanese textbooks about the rape of Nanking. Nothing. Nothing. Most non-Western cultures do not teach anything critical of themselves. We do a really, you could argue, what I'm going to show you in a second, we almost go overboard. That's exactly right. The vast majority of my students over the last 25 years have believed that slavery was exclusively an American problem. That's a problem. If only, and many of these kids are Christian kids who could not remember Pharaoh, right? And so if this is where the social justice mindset comes in. If you actually believe that the only slaveholding country in the history of the world was America, well then America has a huge debt to pay and no other nation does. But yet if you recognize that slavery had been with us and Native Americans had slaves, if empire building is so bad, colonialism and all that, how come no one complains about the Aztecs, the Incas, or the Maya? Where is the call for reparations there? It always blows me away. Islam has been kicking butt and taking names for about 1,000 years. Has anybody ever called for them to give something back? Is anybody pulling down their monuments? No. This is the problem with the way we social justice history. Yes, you don't have to augment how bad slavery was. Teach the truth. But if you teach the truth, then you have to recognize that slavery has been a world problem. Hell, there's a slave trade today, isn't it, that nobody talks about? And it's in Africa. And it's black people being enslaved. But it's Islam. Can't talk about that. And why can't we talk about that? If you've got people being dragged out of places like Somalia and sold as slaves in Saudi Arabia, I think the world would care about that. And so the problem is, and this is what's called multiculturalism, right, in the schools. It sounds like a great idea. Expose kids to a lot of cultures. I agree with that. However, the premise of modern progressive multiculturalism is the only culture we're allowed to criticize is our own. We have to criticize America. We don't dare criticize non-Western cultures because that would be racist. And so the fact that Native Americans owned slaves, or the fact that the Aztec ripped the hearts out of their prisoners and offered them to the sun god, can't really talk about that. And that's where our kids are coming down on. And do you understand why this is happening now? Why are these kids pulling down monuments, desecrating cemeteries? Why are they violently protesting any speech that veers from what they already know? Because these kids have a misunderstanding of history. They've been badly informed in history. And so they magnify the problem. Meanwhile, the real atrocities that are still ongoing in the world, they're numb to. They can't see them. Ed Clemens at the beginning mentioned, right, 150, well, we don't even know, anywhere between 120 and 250 million dead in the name of socialism in the last 100 years. And yet, when I ask my kids what socialism is, well, I'll show you what they say. Before we go, the quiz is here. Here's the setup for it. So I gave these, I called them cultural literacy quizzes. I gave them consistently for 11 to 12 years at 5 universities, Purdue, University of Tennessee at Martin, Ursinus College, Oklahoma State, University of Wisconsin. I estimate conservatively that I administered more than 1,800 such quizzes over that span. And despite not saving each piece of paperwork, I tallied all of the quizzes up and the responses up. Here's one of the questions, all right? That's one we just started with. Excluding besides the United States, name one slaveholding nation or people over the last 2,500 years. Based on 1,206 responses, 80% of them, 965 out of 1,206, left the response blank or indicated specifically that they did not know the answer. And this is, again, 10-12 years, 5 different universities all across the country, and that's the average, right? 80% of my kids could not even name one that they did not know. I asked them to circle the following. Circle all of the following that served as president of the United States: Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Paul Revere, and Alexander Hamilton. And 801 of the 1,206, 66%, actually got Jefferson right, which is still a little frustrating, less than 70%, 75%. The poorest result, however, did occur 3 times, where only 3 students in those classes actually chose Jefferson. Ben Franklin was circled 60% of the time, Hamilton 40%, and even Paul Revere got about 30% of the people voting for him. Do we retroactively give them Secret Service pay? I mean, regarding each Thomas Jefferson statement, circle which is true. He was a general in the Revolutionary War. He defeated Lee in the Battle of Gettysburg. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He owned slaves. He was President of the United States. And here's my sampling. A whopping 1,121 of 1,206, 93% of my students identified Jefferson as a slave owner, and he was. What they don't know, and nobody's bothered to teach them, is that Jefferson actually wrote slavery out of the Constitution. And the Continental Congress put it back. Nevertheless, 93% did know that. 751 out of 1,206, 62% actually thought he was a Revolutionary War general. 66% got him as president. And 40% thought he fought Lee at the Battle of Gettysburg. In one sentence, this is the money, to me these are the money quotes. These are the ones that disturb me the most. In one sentence, define capitalism. 915 out of 1,206, 75% of students defined capitalism in part by using the words greedy, selfish, or unfair, or unambiguously related variance. That's much higher than the 53% of millennials, the 75% of them. Yeah. And then, finally, in one sentence, define socialism. A shocking 1,033 out of 1,206, 85% use the words fairness or equality to define socialism. And, you know, if you've studied, even remotely studied, the history of socialism, what equity is there? I mean, take a look at Cuba. It blew me away, was it last year at this time when Pope Francis went to Cuba? Because you know, right? No one's killed more Roman Catholics in the last 50 years than the Cubans, right? The Castros. They are the preeminent murderers of Roman Catholics in the last 50 years. So Pope Francis goes to Cuba, stands between the two Castro brothers, without a single word about all those dead Catholics, to lecture America about its capitalist system. Right? With a big mural of Che Guevara behind him. And Che Guevara is another one that the kids love. They don't know who he is. They don't know that he liked to kill. He set up Castro's killing fields, didn't he, Che Guevara? Che Guevara was also a homophobe. Whenever there were gay Cubans who were homosexuals, who were arrested and put in the camps, Che liked to shoot them himself. He made a reservation that any homosexual Cuban dissidents who were imprisoned, he would be the one to pull the trigger. This is and Barack Obama in his Chicago offices, right? Had a big picture of Che Guevara there. And this is the social justice discrepancy, right? If you hate genocide and murder, why don't you hate all socialists? Another question, I didn't put it on the film here, is I asked them to name the greatest killer in the 20th century. Who killed more people than anybody else in the 20th century? And about 60% identified Hitler. And none of them, not one of them, in fact, in all those classes in all those years, nobody ever mentioned Chairman Mao. And Mao killed more people than anybody else in the history of the world, probably. And Stalin's pretty close behind that, right? Stalin killed about 60 million himself. But they're 100% convinced that the great socialist leaders of Western culture were benefactors. The Che Guevara's, the Castro brothers. This is the kind of garbage they get in college campuses. So I would make this argument all the time. If you are justifiably outraged about human intolerance, then you've got to be collectively fair about it, right? And when you measure up what's gone on, I ask them this question, they'd have no answer for me. If American culture, if Western culture, is as bad and irredeemable as you say it is, then why was it that human rights, civil rights, gay rights, women's rights, why did those things evolve in Western culture and not in non-Western cultures? How come the Soviets never came up with those? How come the communist Chinese are still not coming up with those? The Castro brothers aren't, right? Why did it happen here? And rather than ask those questions that gets kids curious and helps them to understand, right? You can talk about the evil in the rest of the world without minimizing American evil, can you? Can't you? But you see how bad this gets. Okay, the Confederate flag represents a lot of bad things. Pull it down. But if you're going to make the argument that every aspect of our history has to be erased because it's problematic, then how do you not get rid of the American flag? It flew over slave states a lot longer than the Confederate flag did, and that's coming next, right? Already in college campuses, they're making that argument and pulling American flags down. The other aspect of all of this that's so concerning is the willingness to write everything away because it wasn't perfect. The idea that at some point, and you know, it never applies equally. That's the injustice of it. If we're going to pull that, if Robert E. Lee's statue, very complicated individual, Robert E. Lee. If Robert E. Lee's statue's got to come down because he fought for the Confederacy in the war, fair enough. But then why are we not disbanding Planned Parenthood? The founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, was a racist eugenicist. Wasn't she? Yep. Why did she want abortion legal, Margaret Sanger? To get rid of brown and black-skinned babies. That's exactly right. So where are the progressives calling for the removal of Planned Parenthood? And when you begin to think about it for a second, right? This is the injustice of it all. And this is what your kids are going to experience. And what I'd like to do is give you some advice, if you're okay with that. Oh, before I do that, pretty depressing. Let me share some student writing with you. You want to laugh a little bit before we go to solutions? Here's some, I teach Shakespeare and Renaissance literature, okay? So here are some examples of writing about my period. Socrates was a famous Greek teacher who went around giving people advice. They killed him. Socrates died from an overdose of wedlock. Had to give him half credit for that one. Another one for you. The Renaissance was an age in which more individuals felt the value of their human being. Martin Luther was nailed to the church door at Wittenberg for selling papal indulgences. He died a horrible death being excommunicated by a bull. Gutenberg invented the Bible. Sir Walter Raleigh is a historical figure because he invented cigarettes. Do you notice the title? I put that up there. Didn't even know he was Jewish. Another important invention was the circulation of the blood. Sir Francis Drake circumcised the world with a 100-foot clipper. The greatest writer of the Renaissance was William Shakespeare. Shakespeare never made much money and is only famous because of his plays. He lived at Windsor with his merry wives, writing tragedies, comedies, and errors. In one of Shakespeare's most famous plays, Hamlet rations out his situation by relieving himself in a long soliloquy. In another, Lady Macbeth tries to convince Macbeth to kill the king by attacking his manhood. Romeo and Juliet are an example of a heroic couplet. Writing at the same time as Shakespeare was Miguel Cervantes. He wrote Don Quixote. The next great author was John Milton. Milton wrote Paradise Lost. Then his wife died and he wrote Paradise Regained. And what does it tell you about my university kids that the only subject they know anything about is marriage? The government of England was a limited mockery. Henry VIII found walking difficult because he had an abyss on his knee. Queen Elizabeth was the Virgin Queen. As a queen, she was a success. When Elizabeth exposed herself before her troops, they all shouted, "Hurrah!" Then her navy went out and defeated the Spanish armadillo. And this is a short one, but it's one of my favorites. The Emperor Tiberius fell into a coma and died. And I love this because I wrote back, it must have been a very violent period. And he didn't get it. So in the time that I have remaining, I would like to, though, give you some practical advice. I promised I would do this because some of you have kids or grandkids. Some of you are going to go to college. We've got some young people here. And if you do go to college, I want you to succeed. I want you to do as well as you can. College, if you have a very careful plan, college can be the best thing in the world for you. But let's talk about it a little bit. First of all, and I mean this sincerely, nobody needs college at age 17. Nobody needs it. And nobody needs it at age 17 or 18 if you're going to get in debt for it. It is not worth it anymore. The payoff for a college degree, based on how much you spend to get it, isn't there anymore. Here's what I recommend to you. Ask your, if it means if you can put up with it, have your kids live with you for a couple more years. The kid who starts college at 20 instead of 17 is going to be much better off. The best students I have ever had are the ones who walked away from college for a few years. And they worked. And they saved some money, right? And so when they came back to college, first of all, many of them didn't. Many of my kids who walked away for 2 or 3 years became very happy and made a lot of money doing other things. They didn't need it. Especially boys. Especially boys. This country has a huge shortage of skilled labor. Carpenters, right? They were paying welders in North Dakota $120 an hour, guaranteed 60 hours a week work for 6 months because no one knows how to weld anymore. In New York City, right, swanky Manhattan, they're paying contractors hundreds of dollars an hour because nobody there knows how to build a cabinet. Right? Carpentry work. We think about the degree to which boys are hand-oriented, right? Many boys need to work with their hands. Sending them in college is disastrous for them because they're the kids who are oriented that way who just end up failing after a few semesters or years with a lot of debt. If your kid, the way you handle it is tell your kid, look, live with me for a couple years. Stay at home, we'll pay for your food, board, room, and lodging. Any money you make, you put it in the bank. So that in 2 or 3 years, if you decide you need college or want college, you can go without having to get yourself majorly in debt. I promise you this, the kid who's busted his butt for 2 or 3 years to save up $10 or $12 or $20,000, he's not going to throw it away on a college degree he doesn't need, number one. And he's not going to, if he does go to college, he's not going to blow it on pizza every week. The kids who get lost on college campuses are the ones who go right from high school into a college environment and have no contact with the outside world. College is such an odd bubble. And given the fact that most college kids, most of them are taking 3, maybe 4 classes at the most, kids who have that work ethic already will be able to handle that and still do some work. And so, also ideologically, by the time a kid is 20, as opposed to being 17, they're in a much better place ideologically to resist the hyperbole and the excess and the one-sided progressive politics of college too. Most 20-year-olds have got, especially if they've worked for a few years, let kids pursue their dreams. Let kids intern, just go intern someplace at a video game company or go out and work at Google for 2 years, whatever you want them to do. Just let them do something, right? Because once they come back, another thing is going to happen. Many of them will recognize they don't need a 4-year degree. They just maybe need a 2-year associate's degree. Here's another thing that you can do, and I think it's really critically important. For the first 2 years of college, every state does this now, and New York is the same way. Your kid gets a 2-year associate's degree from one of your many community colleges and then goes to NYU. The final diploma is going to say NYU. It's not going to say community college, right? All the credits transfer. So why pay full big college tuition for the first 2 years when the first 2 years of every college degree is spent doing the liberal arts stuff, right? You know how no kid can show up at college and just start taking accounting classes. You've got to take as many as 60 credits, 2 full years of coursework in all these broad areas, 1 science class, 1 math class, 1 English class, 1 history class. Why do that at the major universities, where you're paying them 4 times what it costs at a community college? And there are no dorms at community colleges. That's another thing. They'll stay home and have them do, and many of the community college courses are online too. So look at it this way. Say for the sake of argument, your kid, instead of going to college at 17, goes at 19 or 20. And then when he decides to go, he gets his 2-year associate degree, right? So now he's 21 with an associate degree, which of course cost him almost no money because he saved all that money to pay for the relatively small fees, right? And now he's 21 years old, he's got an associate degree, got some money in the bank. Promise you this. You send him to NYU then, or her to NYU then, she's going to have a much more balanced perspective on things. Again, what gets kids in trouble are the kids who are subsumed in college life. They step on, and a lot of people think this is a great thing. Maybe when you went to college, we went to college back in the Stone Ages, right? When it was mixer dances and walks on the promenade and homecoming. It's a lot more than that now. Just the sexuality they're going to teach your kids alone. Just the radical sex. If you've been paying any attention to the news, you will see what's going on in college campuses with these sex fairs, right, that are taking place, the kind of libertine and hedonistic kind of sexual experimentation that are being encouraged on kids in college campuses left and right. It's an incredibly, incredibly intense pressure for kids. The ones who get lost, like I said, are the ones who immediately come to college fresh out of high school and get subsumed by that culture. It swallows them up. And I would say, too, if I could only give you one, as moms and dads, I don't know how the kids feel about this. Some of the kids are kind of scowling at me. I understand it. Yeah. But as moms and dad, I can tell you this. If I give you one piece of advice, keep your kids out of the dorms. Look, what goes on in the classrooms on a college, people are watching. How many times have you seen in the last year some pissed off high school kid or college sophomore who records his sociology professor bashing Donald Trump or something, right? And then it makes national news, and inevitably he has to apologize to the professor, right? They're watching the classrooms. The classrooms are being watched. But no one's watching the dorms. Professors have to be somewhat on their guard. We can't just say anything, right? And so it's very rare that one of us says something so stupid, but no one's watching the dorms. In order to be in charge of a dorm as a student, they got students in charge of dorms. You have to get a 2-year degree in dorm management studies. I swear to God. You got to get, and the universities will hire these kids and then pay for their dorm management degree. And you understand this, right? That a dorm management degree has nothing to do with the finances of a dorm. It's all about the socio-political garbage. It's all about handling sex at the dorms. Matter of fact, I had a kid who was an RA for his dorm. He was an ROTC kid, right? Straight shooter, military guy. And to make a little bit extra money, he became an RA in charge of one floor on his dorm. And every August, 2 weeks before classes began, as an RA, he had to get there early to school. Well, he also, because he was in charge of a whole floor of kids, he also was given an entire year's worth of birth control to be able to dole out to the kids on his dorm. You pay for this, you know this, right? That the fees. One of the reasons college is so expensive, because you're paying fees for stuff like this. So this ROTC kid, the second weekend in August, 2 weeks before the kids got back, he was given what was supposed to be a year's supply of birth control, condoms and pills, including a year's supply of the morning after abortion pill. Now, any person, male or female, could come to him and ask for this in his dorm. He was obligated to give it. He told me that after the first weekend the kids were back, he had given them all away, the morning after pills. What was supposed to last a year, he gave them away in 1 weekend. He quit after that. He couldn't do it anymore because he had to go back to the university and get a whole other supply of it. But you're paying for that. All this kind of social engineering stuff that goes on college campuses, you're paying for it. It's part of your tuition. It's part of the fee breakdown. If colleges just focused only on what they needed to educate your kids in terms of math or science or history, 25% of what you're paying now you'd pay. But you're paying for all that other stuff too. Right? And that's why I think it's really critically important for you to be smart about the money aspect of this. I mean it when I say it's not worth it. Unless your kid's going to be a doctor, then $100,000 of student loan debt isn't that big of a deal. But for most of our kids, it's not acceptable. And so you're saddling these two kids that work for Freedom Project who are in their they're 28 and 29 years old, $180,000 worth of student loan debt. They could not have gotten jobs that would have allowed them to pay enough of that off so that they could actually buy a house one day. They're still living out of apartments. And having mom and dad, grandma and grandpa take care of the kids for them because they can do nothing else. This is this is a problem. We're not, that $1.2 trillion is not going to be paid back. It is not going to get paid back. And eventually, as soon as 2020, the candidate who promises most vociferously to wipe that slate is probably the candidate that's going to win as we see these kids move through into their 20s and 30s and 40s now. You can't just write off $1.2 trillion economic dollars. It doesn't happen that way. All right? That cost is going to get defrayed and paid for in a lot of other ways. And why are we sending kids to college when the degree's not going to help them anyway? Why are we sending kids to college and financing them to major in things that aren't going to help them? Look, and I'm an English professor telling you this, right? Most of you are probably sitting there thinking he wasted his stupid life, right? But as an English professor, I'm telling you this. It's just not worth it anymore. You're really setting those kids up for bad things if you do it that way. And so the dorms, that would be my one major piece of advice to you, would be the dorms. Because what goes on in those dorms is pretty shocking, the kind of things that happen in terms of how they... well, here's one more example. It's in the news today. University of Texas at Austin, University of Wisconsin in Madison. Taking your freshman boys, segregating them from the rest of the student body, and telling them why their masculinity is toxic. This is a big deal now. We have decided that manhood, masculinity, is toxic. Boys are being reprogrammed as freshmen to reject manhood and everything that goes with it. The one, if you want to fact check me on this and you go home tonight, the one in the news right now is the University of Texas at Austin Masculinities program. Its entire premise is to break men from being men. You're literally starting with the premise with these boys that they are rapists just for showing up on campus. And you do know, right, what the Dear Colleague letter that the Obama administration sent to the universities about 8 years ago? No. Did you see that? Under Title IX? No. Urged every university in this country to treat allegations from female students as true, whether there's evidence or not. Number one. Number two, men or boys accused of any sexual indiscretion on a college campus must be treated as guilty until they are proven innocent. And put strict regulations on how boys were able to defend themselves legally. And so there is that happening as well. And the magnifying of all of these statistics on campus, right? Things that are happening. The problems here are pretty great. University of Texas, Austin, Wisconsin, Madison, we have those programs. How about this? Did you know that I'm an English professor. Your kid has to take 2 classes his freshman year in writing. Mandatory freshman English, right? Do you know that we're not allowed to teach grammar to your kids anymore? Did you know that? Your kids have to take basic English writing classes, and we can't teach you punctuation, sentence structure, or grammar. You want to know why? You know why. Because it's racist. Right? Well, think about it. The idea that there's one correct way to speak, if all language is the same and we can't discriminate, then you can't have an English class. So what are they doing in their mandatory English writing classes with us? We're not teaching them how to write. It's all the politics stuff, right? We make them write essays on gay marriage and transgenderism and abortion. And as long as their opinion aligns to ours, they get good grades. Because we really can't grade them on their writing. We're doing this more and more. The grade inflation on college campuses is absolutely staggering. Think about it. We're bringing 40% or so of kids to campus who really can't do it. It's not their fault. They just can't do it. But we can't fail them. So what happens? Like everything else, we start gearing our college teaching to the lower 40%. We can't fail them, nor can we afford to teach the real college kids and lose them. And that's why now a college degree is pretty much what a high school degree used to be. And I'm going to tell you again, it's not worth that kind of money for a glorified high school degree. And the more we funnel kids into the colleges who shouldn't be there, the less they're going to get from it. And why are you paying for it? I mean, that's a pretty remarkable thing, isn't it? I mean, this idea that we've dumbed down college so much that, well, I'll give you one more example. You know, too, if you've been watching the news, that correct answers in math and science are now considered a form of bigotry. I got my PhD from Purdue University, one of the great engineering schools in America. And Purdue just hired a dean of the engineering college, a woman, who made the argument that in order to get fewer, what she said, fewer white male engineers, if we have to lower the rigor of engineering courses, we should do it. Now that's insulting. It's insulting to, the only reason there are men engineers is because women are too stupid to do it? Of course not. But that's the assumption here. If we have to lower the rigor of engineering courses, pay less attention to the results of engineering, to diversify engineering, then we have to do that. By the way, did you see that bridge that collapsed in Florida? You saw that was a group of female engineers who had a track record of screwing things up. And they were hired for diversity purposes. You could literally say that bridge collapsed because of that initiative. And so the idea that there are right answers, if you saw my Common Core talk 5 years ago, I said exactly this in Common Core math. What is Common Core math? It is the argument for elementary, middle, and high school math that the right answer doesn't matter. What matters is, can kids move numbers around? See, every kid can move numbers around. Not all kids can get the right answer. So right answers are sort of discriminatory, right? Let's just let the kids focus on moving numbers around. Logic has come under attack. The scientific method. 3 different professors in California universities in the last 6 months have written articles about how the scientific method is a holdover of white supremacy. The idea that science can be understood on certain logical principles is discrimination now. This is what's happening on your college campuses across the board. And when you think about that and how we prepare kids, just keep them out of the dorms. Don't spend the money if you don't have to. Get the 2-year degree. Get the 2-year degree is perfect because it's cheap and it will transfer into all your state colleges if your kids need to go back and get them. 17 and 18 is too young for kids in a college campus now. When you think about the level of politics, the level of bullying, the level of sexuality, the level of intolerance on these college campuses, they're not ready for this. By no means are they. Nothing in high school prepares them for this, what they're going to get. And the bubble is coming. I mean, like the housing bubble 10 years ago, the colleges are way oversold now. And that's why radical things are going to happen. We're going to get a candidate who's going to promise to waive this. We'll see if they're able to pull it off or not, but that's the next coming thing. And of course, people like Bernie Sanders, what they want is mandatorily free college. Here's a question for you, just pure logic question, almost mathematical. If we decide that college is a human right and everybody gets it for free, like they get public high school for free and elementary and middle school, do you think that's going to overall lower or raise the quality of college teaching? Women and men, people of different races, all saying the same thing. You get it, right? College isn't for everybody. And the minute we make it for everybody, and we're almost there, the minute we insist that it is for everybody, you make it something it's not supposed to be. You lower it overall. We're not helping those kids that come and fail out. We're not helping them. Meanwhile, we're neglecting the kids who can do it. And that, again, is Common Core. Why did they name it Common Core? Because it's the lowest common denominator, right? Let's set our educational standards so that everybody can meet them. See, if we set an educational standard that some kids can't make, well, that's not fair, is it? And so let's set a standard so broad and basic that every kid will meet it. Great, but how low does that standard have to be? Because the minute you raise a standard, kids fall off. The minute you raise it higher, kids fall off. So what we've opted for is an educational system that is one-size-fits-all outcome-based education. Can't help the lowest performing kids, but you sure can hold down the high-performing kids. Right? That's what is defined by social justice. See, but I think most of you that you came here tonight, you came here because you know your kids are not the same kid. By the grace of God and thanks be to Him, your kids aren't the same kids. You can't teach your son and your daughter the same way. Your oldest boy is good at math. Your youngest boy is a writer and a history person. Even in your own families, you don't have that kind of conformity. And what it all comes down to, as I wind this up, it all comes down to the same thing. It's pure unadulterated socialism. What is socialism? Outcome-based civilization. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how hard you work. It doesn't matter whether you're smart or not, whether you're hardworking or lazy. Everybody gets the same thing coming out. Right? Well, sometimes a bullet, yeah. That's the great, it's a great story. In ancient Greece, the tyrant Solon had a visitor once who wanted to know, and a budding dictator from another Greek island came to visit the great Greek tyrant, and he said to him, "Sir, would you show me how you run so tight a dictatorship?" At which point the tyrant took him out into the wheat fields and had a cane with him. And he walked along, the dictator did, and every shoot of wheat that grew a little bit higher than the others, he nicked the top off it until they were all equal. That, my friend, is how you become a dictator, right? Everyone's the same. Any stalk of wheat that grew a little higher, cut its head off, right? And how about what Mao did? They can't even name Mao, right? 60 to 80 million dead, Chairman Mao, China. First thing Mao did when he took over communist China in 1948 is he took all the doctors out of the hospitals, the trained surgeons, and he put them on a farm and made them shovel cow shit at gunpoint. And he took all the farmers and put them in the hospitals and made them perform surgeries. And everybody died. Because in Mao's China, there will be no differences. In Mao's China, we are all the same no matter who you are. And that's the end of this. And so where do we end? We end where we started. That what we're doing to our kids in school is a kind of socialism. Think about it. What were the Bolsheviks? They were rabid ideologists who didn't know much. What were the Nazis? Because remember, Nazi stands for I should show you that quiz question. Oh gosh. What does Nazi stand for? They have no idea. They don't know that the word Nazi means National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, the National Socialist German Workers' Party. In other words, the murders of the Nazis go in the socialism column. That's where they belong. But our kids don't know that. And what you see what they're doing to our kids, one size fits all. God made your kids different, which means they all have different learning capacities, different skills, different aptitudes. It is not a problem if your kid chooses a different path in college. There are so many of them where they can make a good living and be happy. And if your kid does need college, there's no reason you have to send him to college and lose his faith in God or country or self in the name of some collective or ideology. There's no need for it. So you can fight those battles and withstand them a little bit as much as you can. So if try not to end on a completely negative note, I don't think. I've been doing this for 25 years. It's getting worse. The ability for people to speak differently, the ability to people to express different worldviews is rapidly vanishing on college campuses. And it's not until something happens, there's no way to reform it from within. No way. Because who does all the hiring on college campuses? Professors do. Who becomes deans and chancellors? Professors who are picked by other professors to get up. There's no way, unless legislature, and I don't know why they won't do it, but I don't know why, if legislators like the state of New York legislature said, look, until you guarantee that every kid can have an opinion on a college campus, we're not going to fund you. Until you allow for genuine freedom of speech, but they never do it. They just keep giving more money to the universities, and they get richer and richer and richer. So I want to thank you very much for being here tonight. I appreciate it. And if you want any of these slides, I'd be happy to send them to you. Pop on up. I got some business cards. I'd be glad to give them to you. And I would be remiss if I didn't close on this sentence. There's one organization in American history who saw this coming 60 years ago. 60 years ago this year. The Tea Parties have come and gone. So many activist groups have come and gone. But there's one group that's been fighting this battle for 60 years, and it's the John Birch Society. And so I didn't come to the John Birch Society until 3 years ago. I'd never heard of them. Shows you how miseducated I was, right? But I'll tell you, they are people who put talks like this together because education is power. The universities know that education is power. And they're using that power to turn your kids into very different kids than the ones you send to them. And take the power back. Thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.